A leader of One SA movement, Mmusi Maimane, is calling for national school stay away on Friday. Maimane's organization wants teachers and learners across the country to stay at home to protest against schools reopening. The COVID-19 pandemic cases have been picking up across the country, and with the number of school pupils and teachers testing positive. Joining us now is One SA movement leader, Mmusi Maimane. Mmusi, good morning. Thank you very much for joining us here on the AM edition of Newsfeed. I mean, just looking at what you're calling for, that schools should reopen only after the peak of the COVID-19 pandemic in the interests of learners and teachers alike. I mean, broadly speaking, many would agree with you. But, just looking at the stay away, I mean, how have you factored in the parents and, caregivers who may not have alternative means to ensure that this stay away, works for them during this COVID-19 pandemic?
Good morning, and thank you so much for the kind opportunity. Firstly, I think it's always important that we realize that in the midst of protest, of course, society is inconvenienced. Protest is not a normal order of the day. It's not something that you should be doing all the time. It's only in extreme measures where you feel that the government is failing to listen to the cries of the citizens, particularly in this instance, poor citizens. So whilst I understand the inconvenience that many citizens might say we are experiencing through this, but I think you can't pit that off by saying that, well, let's just carry on as business as usual, allow our kids to be infected by the virus, allow our communities to be infected by the virus, put our grandmothers, grandfathers at risk. And I think, to me, that is a far smaller price to pay of inconvenience rather than the heavy price of paying when lives are being lost, especially in the peak of a pandemic.
Mmusi, just given what you've obviously announced for that stay away on Friday, I mean, what exactly does it look like? What do you want teachers and learners alike to be doing on the day? How long will the protests be embarking for? I mean, what have you got planned for the day?
No, obviously there's certain other organizations that are planning their own sets of protests. But what we are simply saying is that because you can't gather, because you can't be out in public demonstrating, rather stay at home, stay away from school. Let's make sure that we send a message to this government that in fact we are unhappy with their decision and that in fact we want our kids to be safe, that you can't be risking people's lives in the midst of this high infection rate. So our simple call is that people must stay away from school. And let's show the department that in fact the power still remains with the people.
Mmusi, just looking at the dire situation that some students find themselves in, I mean, we've also heard some of the stories coming through about, schools being the only safe place for some of the learners to access food and feeding scheme programs that are currently underway. I mean, given this call to stay away, what are some of the alternative solutions you're looking at to ensure that those who are exposed to very little, do perhaps get that meal that was promised at school? What's your stance on that?
Yeah, I'm understanding of that call. I respect it entirely. But it doesn't mean that the only distribution points for food ought to be that only in schools. We can use churches, we can use community halls, we can use street drop-offs. We as One South Africa movement have been able to deliver, at least conservatively, to about 20,000 families. So it's possible to go out to communities and say, door to door, we will be able to deliver school. I battle to understand why a department with an immense budget is incapable of doing that. That the only center where they can distribute food happens to be only in a school. So our call is simple. Let's find that alternative. The second alternative is to make sure we adjust curriculum so that more people can be able to study late on in the year post the resumption and all the way into the start of next year. We've made alternatives as to how matriculants can write. I mean, imagine a matriculant who's now going to school and seeing their teachers get infected and then they are off school for 14 days. The stressful conditions that goes with. So I think the alternative plan is that equally so we must delay when the kids get to write matric exams, that we give everybody a fair and equal opportunity to be able to write in the right conditions.
Right.
So to me, I think we can find practical solutions to adjust the year as it stands before us.
Well, so you're just looking at One SA movement, obviously losing the second court bid. I mean, what is the movement's plans from here into? Are you set to appeal, that bid to prevent the reopening of schools? What does it look like on that front?
Well, obviously, the only alternative left to us would be a constitutional court challenge that speaks to whether the right to life can be made equitable to any other right. And that's something that we're in consultation with our legal team to see. Obviously, we recognize the expense that goes with it. We recognize just the absolute necessity for it to be done. But once we've finalized the judgment and had a look at where we go, obviously, we'll take the appropriate steps. But in the meantime, we are saying that because this is a policy decision taken by the National Command Council and this Minister of Education who's committed, citizens must be able to send a message to this political principle.
All right, Mmusi, let's just wrap up this conversation by obviously just looking at where to from here as One SA movement. Let's say the demands fall on deaf ears. The minister does not respond to the stay away that you're calling for on Friday. I mean, what is the future plans for the movement going to look like?
Obviously, then the fundamental alternatives that exist are either legal, but I also do think that in and of itself, the cries of the poor cannot not be heard. So we will put that protest on the table, and in consultation with many other citizens, we will continue this battle. We've already written to the South African Human Rights Commission, and we want to test whether or not we can prosecute this issue of saying, can the right to life be violated by the Department of Basic Education? So there are multiple avenues that are already on the table that we are looking at, and continue the fight on behalf of learners, particularly poor learners.
All right, Mmusi Maimane, leader of One SA movement, of course, just calling for national school stay away on Friday, in conversation with him about what the alternative plans will also be looking like as we go ahead and navigate these uncharted waters during the COVID-19 pandemic.